Okay, you're recording.
All right, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. I'll call the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ad Hoc Committee meeting to order. It is Thursday, April 1st, 2021 at approximately 6:07 p.m. I'll call the roll using the fancy dancy list that Rebecca was kind enough to give to me to make it a little easier to go down the list of everyone who's here. In this order, if you can just unmute yourself and say whether or not you're here. Michelle Berg. Not here yet. Mike Brandt here. Katie Grindall.
Here.
Sam Kaufman.
Here.
Joel Lewis.
Here.
Melanie Meister.
Here.
Monique Mobley.
Here.
Laura Ostrander.
I'm here, sorry.
Gina Pagel.
Here.
Mike Pisani.
Here.
Pam Potter.
Here.
Timothy Shell.
Here.
Christina Schuppeman.
Here.
Diane Rusk.
Here.
Nia Vang.
Here, sorry, answering Michelle.
Is there anyone that I missed? Hearing nobody, I believe we have 14 members of the committee here, so we do have enough for a quorum. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting. I believe Rebecca sent these out a few weeks ago. I wasn't here for that meeting, so I'd entertain a motion to approve if anybody has one.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second. Diane.
Motion by Joel and seconded by Diane. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And I'll abstain since I wasn't here to partake in it. So it's Rebecca, I think it's 13 ayes. I'll abstain. Now we have the agenda, and Joel, you had requested that we flip the order of items 7 and 6. Is that correct for the agenda? Because you have to leave early for the previous engagement.
Yep. So, yep, 7.
All right. So I would entertain a motion that we flip items 7 and 6 in the agenda, as Joel's going to be leaving.
I'll move.
Second.
It's a motion by Sam and Pam. Was that you that seconded? Okay. All in favor of that agenda with the reshuffled order, say aye.
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 All opposed, say nay. All right, so we'll reshuffle that. Thank you, Joel. I believe we had a public comment that came in by email that Rebecca forwarded around to everyone. I don't think we have anyone here at the moment to make any public comments other than that. So
Actually, we do have somebody here to make a public comment.
Yep, we do have somebody.
okay, well, take it away then, Rebecca.
We're good.
Go ahead.
Okay, before I speak tonight or address the committee, I know my glasses are going to probably fog up, so might have to take a second or two to fan those off. Also, I'm here to just provide a public comment. I am not here for question and answer. If you would like to question and answer with me, please feel free to reach me at the high school. I can try to make some time, make some effort for doing that. I'm more of an old school guy. I'd rather talk to you, in person versus email. So that's just me. So enough with that. Good evening. My name is Tim Decora. 510 Cheyenne Pass. I've been a teacher and a coach and community member for 26 years in the district, and I'm a proud member of the Ho-Chunk Nation. I'm here to voice my concerns about a recent proposal to remove a Native American mural from my classroom / the high school old gym. This surprised me, disappointed me, and angered me that I wasn't a part of this discussion. When this topic has come up in the past, school administrators have reached out to me and respectfully asked my thoughts. Since this topic involves the removal of a mural depicting a Native American, I would think someone on the committee should have posed the question, are there any Native Americans in the district or community members we should contact or notify to get their input? Any past or present Native students? To my knowledge, this didn't happen. Though a small part of my comments are in support of the current mural, I've done some research to see that the mural could be updated to reflect a more accurate depiction of an Indigenous person to the area. A Ho-Chunk artist has agreed to work with Terry Engie, one of the co-creators, or work with current high school students to alter parts of the mural to retain some of its history and add to it to make it more up to date. In addition to the mural updates, I would hope that a sign that tells the history of Ho-Chunk people in this area should be added to give it some context. Had we had a Native American voice or voices, some of these ideas could have been or should have been discussed. I felt, being a longtime resident of Waunakee and a Native American, this would give me the experience and right to comment. In addition, there are others who should have had their voices heard, in particular my 3 children who all graduated from Waunakee High School, and in addition, and another staff member. For the past 4 weeks, I've poured my energies into gaining more knowledge on topics related to Native Americans and their place in school districts. In addition, I've talked with other Native Americans around the state who I know personally and respect, and they agreed education about Native American history, cultures, and traditions is needed. I believe this is far more important than whether some student art in a gym is deemed inappropriate, offensive, or morally right to remove. In addition to defending the mural, I've moved on the offensive. And I'm pushing for more Native American education across the state. Yesterday, I met with Wisconsin Assembly, with our Wisconsin Assembly Speaker and a state representative who is the chair of the Special Committee on State Tribal Relations. And they were very open-minded about more education being needed. Wisconsin Act 31 covers this for our great state, which says public school districts need to provide Native American education. We have the opportunity to be the standard for Native American education, to provide more than what is required and lead the state like we do in other curricular areas. I ask that you look at the other side of the coin. And instead of getting rid of or removing something, that you put your energies into more important aspects like creating more awareness and education about Native Americans and their place in the past, present, and future of our school district. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Rebecca, is there anyone else to make public comment?
There is no other public comments.
Okay, thank you. All right, so moving on to agenda item 7 that we're taking out of order, discussion and possible action on interim recommendations to the WCSD-Board of Education regarding issues of immediate concern, recommendations on the creation of enactment of a dedicated reporting system policy for events of bias or bigotry. Joel, you want to start this, or you and Tim? Take it away.
Yeah, Tim, did you do a update on that last time? Like a progress report?
It wasn't on the agenda last time. There was a question that came up late in the meeting about just where it had gone with the Board of Education. So we did have some discussion about it, but it was fairly limited simply because it wasn't directly posted on the agenda.
Okay, so we are still working on that, Tim and myself. And basically at this point, once we get a more finished, polished product, then what we'll do is we'll roll it out to the committee. Right, Tim?
I'm hoping that tomorrow it's a good project day and I can get the pieces that Joel and I have talked about into a draft for Joel to look at. And after Joel's had a chance to look at it, get some students involved from kind of a design whiz standpoint, bring it to this body to get feedback from you and then other stakeholders in the district as well.
Yeah. So we are making progress. We're moving forward with that.
Anything
That's it
else?
for that, Mike. No, that's it for that, Mike.
No. Well, there you go. Well, you can still stick around for our next part of our agenda then, Joel.
Well, that was the part the other part is what I wanted to talk about.
All right, all right. So I guess we're bouncing to the next agenda item 6, the NEA equity audit discussion. So who is going to lead this discussion?
Wait, I thought, aren't we doing the discussion of the imagery? That's
Oh,
what
no.
I wanted.
Is there any objection to going to section 8, discussion of Native American imagery and mural within the buildings? Hearing none, go ahead and do that. I sorry, Joel, I thought you wanted to do 7 first.
No. So I just wanted to, so I wasn't here last week, but I wanted to talk to the committee as a whole. Obviously, this is an important topic. I think I've learned throughout this process myself. I spoke to Tim probably about a month ago, a little less than that, when all this was going on, when we made our recommendation to the board. And I actually had 2 conversations with him, and he expressed how he was feeling about what we recommended. You know, I do have to say that I just assumed, honestly, to tell you the truth, I didn't even know Tim existed in the school district. If I knew that he existed in the school district, I would have definitely reached out to him to get his input. I just assumed that we did not have representation. And that's, I put that on myself, like I should never assume. Right? We should never assume. I should have done some asking around. But basically, I did find out that Tim did exist, and then I didn't realize he was staff for so long, and you know, especially that he was Ho-Chunk. So after our conversation, you know, I realized myself that I felt like I did not have enough information to make the decision that I decided to make. You know, because if I had all that information, I think I know my decision would have been different. I would have said we needed to hold off and we need to get more input. That's what we should be doing as a committee anyway, regardless of what the topic is anyway. I think this is just kind of like an indicator. Whenever we are moving forward with something, let's just make sure and kind of hold each other accountable to be asking those questions to make sure that what we're trying to decide or recommend is what's best. So after I heard what Tim said in our conversation, the reason why I wanted to talk to the group is just to say that I feel like, I don't know how it works now, but I feel like we should get some more feedback in terms of about the mural, in terms of involving Tim, getting some conversation, figuring out maybe what the next step can be. I know before we decided that, you know, we want to get the mural taken down, but I don't necessarily feel that is the best thing now. So that's what I really just wanted to tell the committee as a whole. That's why I wanted it on the agenda so we can have this conversation. And I just want to kind of open it up to others to see how they're feeling about it as well. Because I do know that Tim spoke with others. So I just kind of want to know what their feedback is as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, Nia.
I guess I should speak since I think I second that motion, Joel. So and when we're talking Tim, we're not talking our Tim, we're talking about the public comments. Is that correct? Just want to clarify for myself.
You're correct. I'm sorry. I mean,
No,
Tim
it's not a
Dora.
problem.
Yes, I Yes, Tim, the public comment, Tim.
Okay, it's okay. I just, because when I'm like, I wonder who you talked with. I wanted to clarify that. Thank you for sharing your opinion, and I'm glad thanks to Tim, the public commenter as well. I totally understand where you're coming from, and I agree with what you said, Joel. And if that means pulling back our recommendation, my motion, I can do that. But I'll be honest, I'm still comfortable with just taking it down. I think that it's controversial, and I think either way, honestly, people are going to be offended. People are going to be offended. And I think part of sitting on this committee is making uncomfortable, hard decisions that people are going to be split about. That being said, I don't have any personal investment in it. So if it means a lot to people to have a conversation, I'm more than open to it. So
I'll
Thank
just,
you.
I'll get to the people who have their hands up in order, but I'll just note that we're noticed today for discussion. We're not noticed for action on anything or changing anything. So I think it's important to have the discussion, and what I can at least communicate to the committee is that right now, anything that we were discussing doing as a recommendation is going to the district's goal committee next, which is next week, to discuss basically anything, and presumably provide some form of a recommendation to the full board, which will then be talking about it in 2 weeks. And at that full board meeting in 2 weeks, there will be a report as to what's coming out of both this committee and the goals committee. And I'll be the one giving both of those reports. So I'll go over the minutes that Rebecca puts together and communicate what we talk about today to the full board when we're talking about this in about 2 weeks. So
Mike, I just had a quick question. So just say we do decide to change the recommendation. How does that work?
we can't do it today.
No, not necessarily today, but if we do decide to do, what do we need to do? Put that on the agenda to take action?
That would be required to be on the agenda as a notice potential action. Yes.
Okay, all right.
So I think Laura had your hand up first. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm really glad that this conversation was brought up. I think that we started to sort of veer off a little bit in a different direction in the last couple of weeks to try to get some immediate action. I think the most powerful action is by walking through the audit steps that we were taking so that we could fully vet things and hear perspectives beyond our group. And I fear that if we take a step outside of that, we might shortchange anybody in the future within this topic and other topics to make decisions that aren't incorporating the views of many people that we're making decisions for. So not only for this topic would I like to go through the audit process, but also the other topics on the table so that we can come up with a clear plan before we make any decisions moving forward. Just my perspective.
Thanks, Laura. Diane, your hand is up next.
Yeah, thanks. So I think it was the day after the evening that we voted on the mural, where the village administrator hosted a meeting with the university project that is involved in some acknowledgements. I think there's also a curricular aspect to it, and that's a project that's in partnership with the Ho-Chunk and UW-Madison, I think the Nelson Institute. And I'm wondering, and that was, I was able to attend that, and it was really interesting, and I was not aware of those activities going on, and I'm wondering if this is an opportunity to connect better with it. I think I heard Tim was going to be involved with that, because that would give broader representation and be inclusive of both Mr. Cora, whose comments I really appreciated, as well as the comments submitted, I believe, by some of the children, and also move in, I think, maybe some of the directions that he was recommending in terms of focusing on education and more awareness and regarding the Ho-Chunk in this area.
Michelle, go ahead. You're up next.
So I feel like I based some of my decision on, I feel, if I recall right, someone needs to refresh my mind. did you send some documents and there was like a letter or something in there that said, I don't recall anymore what it was from. Was it the Madison School District saying that all the imagery needed to be eliminated by a certain date? Am I imagining this, or
I don't.
what was that letter? I swear
We-
there was a letter.
We did get a letter, and that was from I believe that was the school board president up in Oshkosh who sent a letter in. The public comment we had at a previous meeting. I don't think there's any specific like deadline for removal of anything. If anyone else remembers that, can chime in. I don't think there's anything that exists like that.
So there is a fund that was brought up to legislation to remove all types of murals of that sort from schools. It hasn't been approved yet. It's actually just been introduced in the past like month. And I know what letter you're talking about. There was a letter saying, hey, we are in support of removing. I do remember that letter. I know what letter you're talking about. I don't remember who gave it though. So those are the two pieces I do know.
I think, Tim, you were next. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a few comments here. First, I want to apologize to the committee. I've already, done this, with Tim, because, we have a lot of different people on the committee, and not everybody is familiar with everybody that's on the district staff. I was somebody who probably, had I been thinking more carefully when we originally discussed this topic, that could have said, there's an important voice that should be in this conversation that isn't here. And we should slow down till we have a chance to connect in with Tim Decora and get his perspective. We also have another staff member at the high school who is a tribal nation member. He is not a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, but Tim is. And so I want to apologize for not kind of flashing the slow down sign on that. I do want to comment on what Diane was talking about. The village, as part of the sesquicentennial commemoration, is working with the Nelson Institute and the Ho-Chunk Nation on a project to really raise the visibility of the Ho-Chunk culture as part of the village of Waunakee. For those of you who are familiar, who remember what you've learned about tribal nations in Wisconsin, Waunakee, our entire district, is in Ho-Chunk country. We have protected regions even within the school district. And if you go down by the lake by Governor Nelson State Park, there are even parts of the district where we have known burial mounds, but there are other sensitive sites within the district. So it's a huge part of our historical heritage here in Waunakee. And I think, Tim's been involved with that project. I've become involved with that project. There is a team, and I don't know with the undergraduate student schedules, if it will work out for them to come into a future meeting of our committee, but if it does, they might be open to that, to talk about what they're working on. But I think the key thing is it aligns with, what Tim shared with us in his remarks tonight. We should do more than just meet the Act 31 requirements. And in particular, because of the historical heritage of Waunakee as Ho-Chunk country, part of that, a large part of that, should really be elevating the visibility of the story of the great Ho-Chunk Nation in the education in our district. And so, there are things the village is doing, and I think there are things we can do as a school community around that. That's an area of great importance to Tim. I think it should be an area of great importance to us as a committee, and that, I think, is a potential area that we could have a recommendation on. I know we don't have action posted tonight, but when we return to action items potentially on this topic, I would certainly welcome something that would really, set that expectation for the district to move beyond requirements to really a standard of excellence in this area, particularly with regard to the Ho-Chunk Nation.
Thank you, Tim. Dr. Potter, go ahead. I think you're next.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a couple of comments. First of all, I feel terrible that Mr. Decorah was, that it angered him so much, but I think in many ways, what this has accomplished is something that we should feel very positive about, because what he's called our attention to, his intention to involve students in not just tearing this down, but calling attention to it, revising it in a much more informed way, and really launching an educational project that I think serves a very noble purpose. I also appreciate his comments that we should be talking more about curriculum. Maybe that's not the purview of our committee, but I would like to see us engage in that more at some point. I also wanted to maybe offer some ideas on where we go from here procedurally. My understanding is that we're an advisory committee. We don't make policy, but we give recommendations to the board. It's up to the board to then decide what to do with these. I think by bringing it into the discussion, and if perhaps we could hear more about what actually what happened at the board meeting. But by bringing this up for a discussion at the board meeting, by publicizing it, I think it prompted this discussion, and I'm not really convinced that we need to do anything more at this point, because we really do just function in an advisory capacity.
Katie, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to echo a few things that have already been said. I had a conversation with Tim as well. That's Tim Decorah, not Tim Shell. And I think really what I apologize, and what I think we need to learn from what the decision, the recommendation that we made, is we need to make sure that the voices are heard of the people that we are making recommendations about. And so that goes for anything moving forward. I want to be cautious that we are including those voices in our conversations and reaching out to get their perspectives, and not seeing it through our own personal perspective, which probably has bias to it. And in addition, I think Tim does have a great perspective in that this should be educationally based, and we should use this opportunity to educate the community and our students that walk into our building each day.
Pam, go ahead.
Sorry, there was one more thing I forgot to mention, and that is that when we were talking about the materials that we had access to when we had this discussion, and I do recall very vividly that we had a document at our disposal that laid out in very disturbing terms that this type of imagery can have serious negative psychological impacts on Native American students. So I know that was what was motivating my position on this. I think that Mr. Decorah doesn't share in that. It doesn't share in that perspective, but I think it's also something that we did take into account, and I think it was important that we did.
So this is Joel. So now I don't remember taking anything into account with Tim. I didn't know, Tim, did he make a statement prior to this that we heard? Because I'm saying, I think that's the thing that I just didn't understand. Like, I wish I had more information. That's all. Obviously, I'm not saying, our intent and what we're trying to do, but it's more about the impact. When I hear that there's a whole chunk individual who does not have a voice, and we're about a whole chunk mural, that's a problem. If we're not getting to hear that information. That's all I'm just trying to say. It'd be no different if all of a sudden there was something that was derogatory towards African Americans, but you leave out all the African Americans, their voices, and then it's decided otherwise that we as a committee know best. So I think it's I just feel like it's just about obtaining more information, just having more of the discussion, because even with the mural, which is kind of cool, that those students who are working with the village, they can actually do something for the placard that we were thinking about doing, you know, to kind of uplift the whole chunk in this area as well. So we might not even have to like reinvent the wheel. We could probably tap into that. So there's a lot that we can do. I think it's just bringing it up and just having that conversation about that. And then again, for me, including Tim, other than just what he did with the public comment, I think the public comment's great, but I feel like Tim should, you know, we should be getting, because he's working with the village as well. So it would be great just to kind of just hear more. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, well, seeing no other really hands, I guess the only thing I guess I'll add to this is I appreciate Tim coming in and saying his piece. And I appreciate everybody's comments here on this. I'll say for my part, I don't know if anything that Tim has said or shared either directly or through here would really make how I approach this really any different. Joel, you and I had a conversation offline about this in general. I was reluctant to specifically reach out to one individual, given actually the story you told about, I think it was when you were sitting in class when you were younger and there was some sort of representation of like an African-American in a story and you felt very pressured to have to represent that entire community. So I appreciate Tim taking on himself to bring it up. I would have felt a little uncomfortable reaching out directly to one person to say that you represent everyone, because frankly, Tim doesn't represent everyone. He represents how he feels about something. And after hearing a little bit more from Tim, I reached out to some of the people who had previously talked to me, the individuals through the Native American logo and mascot task force. And I'll be honest, some of the people I talked to were actually fairly angry about Tim's opinion. They felt that that's a good thing that some people feel pride and a sense of honor in representation, but they also get frustrated that that is somewhat not considering those negative effects that Dr. Potter brought up. So hold on, Joel. This is one of those things that I think it's meant to have a conversation about. I'm glad we're having this talk now. And again, I mean, I'm a cynic, but this is something that's been up in the high school for 46 years. And Mr. Decor has been teaching for 25 years. And I don't know why it took this committee taking a vote to remove a mural to start talking about doing a curriculum about Native American studies. That's something that should have happened before this committee. I'm glad it's working on it now, but I'm frustrated that we're effectively shaking the trees and that's what's causing some form of action. I don't know what about this is incentivizing someone to talk about, let's do curriculum now, because that's something we are already doing. It's something specifically that's written into our charter to do. And I mean, I asked him about that already, like, what is our curriculum? Well, it's the same thing with people who are upset about mental health in schools now. I love that people are caring about that. I want to see the caring about that before we have a crisis and after we have a crisis, not when our own immediate interests are being impacted. So this will all come up at the goals committee next week. It's going to come up at the board meeting in a couple weeks too. I don't think we have, I agree with what I think someone said earlier. I don't think we have to specifically do something right now because we're not really doing anything other than kind of having this conversation, which is, again, what we're all here for too. So Laura, go ahead. You have your hand up.
Thank you. I think there's two different pieces we're talking about here. The piece that resonates with me is this is about process and what is the best process to get to an end, to understand and hear all perspectives. Now, I understand that it is one person and that we're honoring sort of the Joel example of not being one person, but we're also a very still not super diverse group of 14 people sitting here making decisions about a mural, about a group of people. They may have different representations for how they feel within the Ho-Chunk Nation, but we as a group, as a process, owe it to the conversation to get many different versions so that together we can have that. So this is more about process than it is about one opinion that might be a nay versus other people saying a yay. We have to do the work the right way to hear all voices.
So let me just, so this is, okay, so in terms of, and this is a response to Mike, so in terms of, this is not a new thing. Tim DeCora told me that this has been happening for the last 30 years, or less than that. He says this issue has come up several times before. This is not the first time that this has come up, and it seems like it goes to the wayside and comes back. And you know, the thing I do have to say, you know, for me, this is not personal. So it's not about what one person does, because, you know, if you listen to the board meeting that happened, all these people came out of the woodwork to give opinions about a topic, which I don't even know how they knew that we were even going to have that conversation. So I feel like, you know, all this is really about having a conversation about it. And it's not about like what's right, what's wrong. But my thing is yes, about voice, because, you know, I am a minority, you know, so we're having people who are not minorities making decisions because they feel like what is best. And that is not okay. So all I'm saying is that we need to step back. And I've learned through this process that even myself has to step back, you know, and whatever reason Tim has for it. I don't know what Tim has in terms of the mural, but the thing is that obviously it means enough to him and to his kids. So all I'm saying is that if we have a whole chunk individual saying that, like, why wouldn't we want to listen to them? What are we like? What are we afraid of? Like, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, we might change what we do or recommend not do, because obviously we're not doing it. But I don't understand like what the issue is. But this is not the first time. This has been happening. Tim told me every 10 years this topic comes up about that mural. This is not the first year. I just didn't know anything about the mural till it got brought up. That's all. So, thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Katie, go ahead.
I guess my biggest concern is that that there's a process that's going to be followed, not whether that the mural is taken down or stays up and is, you know, modified. But the idea of having some type of process to hear multiple voices and ensure that it's not just a rash decision, and we are going to have a plan put forward. So if that's going to come out of the board, I want the board then to make some type of process for everyone to follow when this is happening.
Exactly why they referred it to the goals committee from our March meeting. All right, I don't think there are any further hands up, so not seeing anything else there. If anyone else has any other comments? All right, Joel, are you gonna leave us now?
Yeah, I was just typing goodbye, but
All right.
I'll see everybody next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. All right. So I suppose we can go back to the regular order, the NEA equity audit discussions.
Okay, so we had hoped to get some of this information out before. You know, I ended up with some contention for time. So what we do have tonight is a slide deck. I'm going to walk us through the slide deck and share some information that relates to the items in sections 4 and 5. Gina is going to be watching traffic, and I think Katie is going to be our note taker. And I think once we're done going through the slide deck, which is in our folder, one thing we're going to be looking for some guidance on the committee is, given that you're seeing the information for the first time tonight, are you comfortable going through a voting process on these items, or are we better off coming back and do a pre-vote before our next meeting and you've had time to kind of process through the information that you'll see? So keep that question in mind. Some of these items from my perspective, but again, I've got stance here are fairly clear. I think some of these are more open to, different perspectives, but it'll be interesting to kind of see what the reception is as we go through it. So what I'm going to do is share the screen and bring up criteria 4. So each slide speaks to one of these indicators. So 4A is our school hires educators who complete an accredited state mandated residency program prior to obtaining initial licensure and have access to complete an equivalent alternative. So this is really asking the question, is our school hiring highly qualified teachers? And I'm going to take you, DPI actually produces an extremely valuable report that shows where you stand as a district and shows where you stand in relation to other districts, and I'm going to bring up in a moment. But I can tell you that our new hires, with very limited exceptions, are fully licensed. The exceptions that you might see would be, one, we will sometimes hire, and again, this is rare, and we're fortunate that it's rare for us. It's not rare for all schools in the state, where we may hire someone with a license with stipulations that used to be known as an emergency license. And these would be areas of shortage. And the most common area of shortage, and this is true statewide, would be for some of the special education classifications. Other common areas of shortage statewide are bilingual. We currently don't have a bilingual program in Waunakee. That's something that may evolve in the future. Very, very, very rarely, we will have a candidate that we find to be very impressive, and they're fully licensed, but it is in an adjacent assignment. So for example, you might have somebody who is licensed for secondary level English language arts, and we might be hiring them, for example, say the intermediate school, to primarily teach English language arts and social studies, but that's even though they would be licensed 612 for ELA, that's different than the license we would typically hire for at the intermediate school. These are very rare exceptions. It only happens when we have a very strong candidate, and we work with them promptly to add the additional licensing on as a layer. Now, the DPI report, and I encourage you to kind of check this out more at your leisure. Some of you may have seen this for other districts, but it's something that satisfies federal requirements. It's the Inequitable Distribution of Teachers report. And is the width okay for everybody right now? Okay, I see a nod from Monique and some thumbs up.
Yep, it's good.
Okay, so what we have here is, you have all the descriptions here, but it's really looking at experience and then teachers who are out of field or ineffective. And it shows you where that's existing in your school system and how does that track across the presence of students of color in schools and the presence of economically disadvantaged students in schools. And I'm going to go right to the tables and the graphics. It's a great report, and I encourage you to kind of, when you have time, track back and look at this all. But none of our schools were identified for having significant issues in this area. But I'm going to show you where we stand in the state. So measure 1 is out of field or ineffective teachers by economically disadvantaged. So what you're seeing here on measure 1, the vertical axis is the percent of teachers in a school, it's teachers plus a few other student-facing assignments who are out of field. And for the last year this report was prepared, 3 of our schools had 1 individual each, and that is why 3 of our green dots are slightly higher than the others. The horizontal axis is showing us a percentage of economically disadvantaged students in each school in the year the report was prepared. And then all of the other dots, where Waunakee is green, all of the other dots represent other schools in the state of Wisconsin. And so what you see here is we're among the lower percentages for out of field teachers. And we are also at the lower end of percent economically disadvantaged students. The next chart does the same thing, but with inexperience. And again, these are people who are new to the profession. And what you see here is, again, we're the green dots. And in all of these charts, the red is the area of concern for state accountability and federal accountability. But you can see that, again, and this depends on turnover. And when we have teacher turnover and hire, or we hire for new positions, who we're actually hiring. And in this case, you can see we had one school where we had a fairly high number of people who were fairly new in the profession at the time this data was taken. But you can see this was a school that was not one of our schools with higher economically disadvantaged. And we will go down. The next one does the same measurements by students of color. And again, for out of field, you can see we are well over on the left-hand side, which means, we don't really have significant areas of concern. The next one will be inexperienced by students of color. And what you'll see here is, again, our schools are fairly tightly clustered in terms of percentages of students of color. And so again, there's nothing in our local data that shows that our schools with higher percentages of student of color tend to skew towards having more inexperienced teachers or teachers out of licensure, of which we have extremely few to begin with. So this puts our 6 schools in local context, and it also puts our 6 schools in context with the state as a whole. So I'm going to get back to the presentation now. Are there any questions about what we just saw in terms of hiring accredited teachers? Gina, do we have any hands up? I'll give it some wait time.
I have a hand. What was the big pink cloud over everything?
The big pink cloud is DPI's area of concern. These are, in the pink cloud, are schools that have higher numbers of out of licensed teachers, out of field teachers, or a higher percentage of inexperienced teachers. And again, everybody has to start someplace, but it is, if you end up with a school where everybody's new, you do have to wonder about the environment for the kids. And it's not only higher levels of that, Monique, those are also schools that are serving higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students and higher percentages of students of color. Any other questions? Nia, who may actually help make this report for all I know.
Tim, I don't know, this is probably further down, but let me know if this is following the mandate that came up with Tony Evers requiring some sort of equity lens to be put on top of this also. Do you know, because currently right now, as we're speaking at DPI, there was a mandate that came through from Tony Evers that said, hey, you guys have to, when you're hiring all the way down to the teacher level, are you putting things in place to not only hire teachers that represent the student's body, but also staff that represent down from, and I didn't know if this covered that or not. It's just a question. I mean, it's not exactly.
So you're talking about some of the policy directions,
right?
That were kind of situated behind what the Madison School Board did back on Monday.
I didn't know it was Monday, but I do now.
Yeah. Currently, there's no measurement on this report to show how your staff demographics compare to your student demographics. I mean, this particular report is designed to fulfill a federal accountability mandate, and that's not part of ESSA, but I do anticipate that we will be seeing in the future more reporting on that to fulfill kind of that state direction to be able to share with
Okay.
stakeholders.
Thank you. This is a little bit removed, but I'm like, it's connected and I wanted to know where we were at with that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move down. B, our school offers opportunities to grow educational leaders through formal and informal pathways, such as mentoring, state, national endorsements, or other methods. So I'm going to kind of share a little information here. And then really, if we have some of our teachers that want to kind of share their perspective from the teacher lens, I think that would be, helpful. But Wisconsin does require all school districts to offer some kind of mentoring support for teachers in their first 3 years in the profession. There are varying degrees of investment and structure to those programs. Dane County as a county is a region of the state that actually has a higher level of fidelity in implementing mentoring for our initial educators. We have a county consortium, the Dane County New Teacher Project, that is affiliated with a new teacher center at the University of California at Santa Cruz, which is probably the best regarded evidence-based mentoring program. And all of our teachers who are new to the profession do receive support from a mentor trained in the new teacher center model. So our mentors go through 2 years of training facilitated by the Dane County New Teacher Project. And what they're trained in is this model called the optimum, these days is called the optimum learning environment. And it has a set of indicators where new educators get feedback from their mentors on, are you creating emotionally, intellectually, and physically safe environments for your students? Are you implementing equitable, culturally responsive, and standard aligned curriculum and instruction? Are you meeting the diverse needs of every learner? And so there are characteristics, and then there's actually a set of rubrics that go along with this that mentors come in and they provide feedback for. And again, this is a framework specifically for new teachers. And all of our initial educators get this through their mentors. And so for our educators here that are in Waunakee and have some familiarity with our framework and our staffing, if you've got anything to share, Katie, if you've got anything you want to share from the principal perspective, certainly would welcome that. I'm giving the Mount Everest view here.
Yeah, that's why I raised my hand. I think we also have building mentors. They're not necessarily educational focused or your educational teaching practice focused, but they do have a lot of conversations around that. And those mentors are, there's one person within each building that supports all new hires to that building. They don't have to be new hire or new to the profession, but they're new to the building. So not only as a 10-year veteran teacher, you could be coming new to the district and you'd be getting that mentor support. That's really to learn our local practices, to learn simple functions and logistics of the building. So that would be one thing I want to add. The other thing I would probably want to add is I really do think our PLCs act as mentorship and learning opportunities for all staff. And we have new teachers that come into these PLCs. Thank you, Mel, for putting that in, and not, I'll use professional learning communities. So at the elementary levels, we have them at each grade level. And then we have department ones for our encore classes. And as you go up beyond 6th grade, 7th grade starts hitting more department, I guess, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think 6 is also more departmentalized as
Yes.
well as having the teams. But then you have the support of other teachers, and this is where we're looking at standards, looking at establishing our ELOs or essential learning outcomes, and then really talking about what assessments we're going to use for students to make sure that they master those ELOs. And then the meat of it, after we get through those 2 logistical parts, is really talking about your practice and how we are going to ensure that we meet the needs of all students, how we are going to present content, and discussing the best strategies and most effective strategies to present that content and have students engage within the content. And I now that we are probably 6 years into this process, maybe 7, I can't honestly remember, that you are collaboratively learning with each other every day you're in these conversations. And that is building content leaders, that is building strategy and practice leaders, that they impact each other's practices daily. And as new teachers enter this, they will feel the collaboration to be one of the strongest things I think we have in Waunakee to grow our teaching staff.
And I think, when we talk about informal pathways, and thank you for sharing that, Katie, I think the PLC model is a great example of an informal pathway, of induction. And definitely there are benefits, and we hear about that from our folks.
I just
Do we
wanted
have any other hands?
Yeah, there was something from the chat. Monique was hoping for clarification on a new teacher. It's first 3 years, is that right, Tim?
Yes, first 3 years in the profession. It used to be the first 2 years. That changed 3 or 4 years ago to be first 3 years.
Yep, I remember when that happened. And
I
then
will say I went through that process. Waunakee had it a long time ago, way before it became required. So I went through that process as a second year teacher 15 years ago now, 16 years ago. And I think I learned more in those years with my mentor than I probably did like in college as like actual applicable things that are going to change my teaching practice.
And in terms of who the mentors are, yes, in the way we implement the model, Monique, those are retired educators. That is not the practice in all districts. Some districts have enough teachers that qualify for mentoring that they actually have release mentors. Similar to our instructional coaches, they are full-time staff members that serve in that mentoring role. But yes, they all do go through a series of 8 workshops, 4 in the first year, 4 in the second year. In this model, each workshop is a 2-day workshop. So in their first 2 years of being a mentor, the mentors themselves receive 16 days of training to be a mentor in this evidence-based model.
I will just share about my own perspective as well. And to be honest, I'm not certain about all of the different segments of this criteria or if anything fits somewhere else. But in response to what Katie just said about the program, I participated in it as a first-year teacher 14 years ago here as well. And that wasn't necessarily my experience. I felt very supported by it, and I thought it was worthwhile. But what I just saw flash on the screen momentarily about it did get me excited, because the framing around equity and again, things I just saw in passing there really felt like an improvement, because when I went through it, it was why not to use red pen and trivial things about that didn't seem like what I just saw on the screen. So I'm excited about the progress. I found it to be beneficial, but I felt very prepared when I arrived, maybe in a different way than Katie was voicing. My the thing that I was hoping to talk a little bit about is this being specifically about educational leaders. So not just about being an educator, right? I mean, we train before we are hired, we are mentored once we get here, but I would love to see there be additional focus in our district on developing teacher leaders and honoring the work of teacher leaders and perhaps compensating the work of teacher leaders in a way that currently does not happen. I serve on tons of committees in an educational leadership position, and all of that work is donated time and effort. And occasionally it means that I have meetings during the day when I would be teaching. And so that means that I now need to plan for a substitute in order to go and serve in a teacher leader role that also isn't compensated. So I think we have definitely room for growth. I also know that I find myself often at the table, and that's because I have advocated for myself to be at the table, and because as a member of the Waunakee Teachers Association, we work to advocate for teacher voice. But I think we as a district have room to grow on really, as a district, developing teacher leaders and continuing to grow educators in their roles in leadership and advocacy, and promoting the kind of change that we're talking about in curriculum and things like that. So that wasn't a part of what was presented, but when I was looking at this criteria, those were some considerations that came to mind for me.
Gina, thank you for sharing that. And that was the kind of feedback I was hoping we would get when, asked the teachers to kind of come into the space. Some things that I would say is this is, in terms of growing leadership groups, that is always a thing that I think all districts do work on. And Gina touched on some important points. So, in our district, we do have department head, department chairs, department coordinators, kind of the professional development of those teacher leaders in their leadership role is something we've been discussing in the last year or so. And there's no question there are opportunities for us to provide more in that area, as well as the stipends that the people who are occupying those roles and serving very well in those roles receive for the time they put in. So yeah, that's definitely a great point, Gina. And one thing I would also say with respect to the new teacher center model that went through a significant, in the time since both you and Katie have gone through mentoring, it's gone through 2 revisions. And the most recent revision, which was 4 years ago, is the one where really the modern equity focus did come in. So that is it's not brand new, but it has only been in place for a few years. So definitely. Christy, you have been up for a while, and then I see Monique raised her hand.
Perfect. And I'm guessing Monique and I might be on a similar wavelength, but teachers absolutely need mentoring. But one of the things I can tell you as a student services staff personnel is that our district does not have mentoring for new counselors, social workers, psychologists. We tend to develop it within our own teams. I do know other districts that do have someone hired as mentors. I can tell you, like when I first was a baby social worker, I don't know, I probably made it's a really complicated position, as is with teaching. And then I thought, if we're thinking about sky's the limit, I noticed Monique put in there about the paraeducator training, and then truly leadership for all staff. And I just, the more we can build each other up, I think is critical, and with the equity lens. And I'm really glad to hear, Tim, you say that piece is incorporated now, because I think that's critical. But we've developed this awesome mentorship for teachers, which is critical, but I encourage us to look even broader at additional staff. And I have no idea what is set up for administrators, and I'm not sure what that looks like, but all critical roles. So
that's a common topic of conversation across the consortium. That's something we have talked about for the more specialized areas, potentially moving outside of each district, providing its own mentoring to maybe some cross-district partnerships for areas like student services and potentially principal leadership. What a Madison and sometimes a Middleton Cross Plains can do as a larger district is partly a size thing. And I do think we may see some changes along the lines of what you've articulated, Christy, coming in the next few years from the county level. But it's definitely an area of need. This generally serves teachers well, but other classifications, you don't see the same kind of support. It's a good observation. So Monique and then Katie.
So thank you. And I think Christy really did start it off well. And I'd like to say that with working with our ELL department, which is so small, there's only 5 of us. So it's not the same as working with some of the bigger departments. This is across the district. I've been very fortunate as a paraeducator to really have a supportive department chair and a supportive admin leadership that has allowed me to take professional development, mostly through WIDA, which is our professional consortium, for training. But it's because I've asked and they say yes. And I think that has helped me to be a more effective paraeducator for working with students. I have to say that the things that come just like from the school, like that first day of school for, paraeducator meeting, we're learning, safety measures in the building and, what forms to fill out and how to do things. That's not really honoring the role that I think most paraeducators are using within the school district. They're really working with students. I don't know. I think that there's a lot that can be done to promote paraeducation or professional training, and letting them know that they are welcome and encouraged to be taking the different programs and activities that are offered through Eduphoria and all the different programs that we have through the school. I personally do it, but I don't see many paraeducators at a lot of the professional development that I take. I don't know if they don't know that it's available to them and it's not encouraged to them, but I think we have a strong group of paraeducators who would probably be very open to getting more advanced training on content, not just how to deal with a student that might be having an issue, but how to learn to work on an educational aspect with the students too.
Monique brings up an important point, which is we have, teachers are the largest employee group in the district. But we do have other employee groups and they're compensated differently. The way that training and incentives for training are embedded and supported is different for each employee group. And so probably a lot of you know what a paraeducator is, but in fact, I think probably everybody knows what a paraeducator is, maybe not by that name. Educational assistant, teacher's aide. There are a lot of different names you might have heard depending on where you grew up or what institution you've been in. But these are support personnel that play a really vital role in the operation of the schools. And they have typically as much student contact when they're in the building as a teacher does. They're very student facing. And one of the reasons why we have criteria 4 here in the equity audit, I'm trying to, this is an R framework, but thinking about the way the framework authors probably did, you want to have a strong educational system as your foundation for equity, but then you also want to have a system that is attractive through its quality to compete for a diverse candidate pool. And you also want to make sure that you have systems in place so you continually to provide opportunities for growth for your staff to meet the needs of students, to be culturally responsive, to know how to intervene when biased actions happen in the school community. So Katie, your hand was up first, and then Laura.
So we, in response to the paraeducator training, Prairie, not this past year, prior to COVID, so it would have been 2019, we're kind of piloting a para induction program for our grade level paras to start with. And then we were going to work into our special education paras, and we incorporated some special education paras into that training, but really it was looking around best practices for small group instruction, best practices for strategies when you're working with larger groups, or how to get attention of groups, behavior things aligned to Ross Green, and some of the responsive classroom things, I should say developmental designs, as well as restorative practices. So those are all trainings that we had developed, started implementing them. They didn't necessarily get continued this year within COVID due to inability to have time. We highly encourage our paras to attend any of the professional development that is offered by the district. For example, the full day of Ross Green training, we were paying our staff, para staff, to attend that training. We also encourage them to be voices on different committees that we have, whether it's developmental designs now, SEL or PBIS, things that they can have a voice within that. So it's something that we value, as we value their input and their the work that they do each day with students. So I think that's something that is in the work in progress, and how we can continue that down the road will be super important and valuable to our profession in school.
Thank you, Katie.
Katie, is that unique to Prairie? Can I just ask?
So Prairie was, Dean and I were the ones that were starting that. Mostly elementary is the only ones that have grade level paras. And Dee and I put something together to start piloting and figure out the nuts and bolts of it. And then COVID kind of hit. So it was something that we were going to work with the other schools with after we had started figuring out how it could be implemented. Part of the problem is going to be who is going to offer these trainings. So I was offering most of them, and we were pulling initially at the beginning of last year, we pulled all paras every Monday morning for X amount of time to offer different trainings for all of September and most of October. It was about a 6-week training. I had Allison Fuller, our instructional coach, do some stuff on small group instruction and ELA standards. And then we were going to do some more math type stuff. And so we did that induction program of 6 weeks, every once a week. The problem came in this year, it just didn't continue. So we have a lot of the resources there ready to kind of get the ball rolling. So hopefully next year that can happen. I know Kate Vandebloom last year offered to most of our elementary schools, and a lot of people attended because I jumped on those. During COVID in March, I went to her and I said, hey, this is a great time to really build up our paraeducators and the staff that we have and provide them professional development. They're not, when our schools were fully closed, we were still paying them. And so let's get the ball rolling on some restorative practice stuff, some Ross Green. And so she was leading a bunch of development. And when I jumped on, there was at least 20 paras K4, and not all from Prairie yet because I didn't know them. So I think we were trying to really build up. And so we have some stuff, some trainings there and implemented. The problem is going to be creating fidelity and an actual like induction program of who's going to be taking over this to lead this. Is I'm not sure building administrators really can have that on their plate to be able to do that.
Katie, thank you for kind of sharing what was going on there with the Prairie pilot. And also, Mel, I saw you jumped in, you clarified on some of our acronyms and jargon.
Yeah, I'm sorry about
No,
that.
no, don't be. I mean, I think you brought some good information to the space. You know, from an equity of voice perspective, is there anybody else on the committee that kind of wants to ask a question on item B before we advance? Do we have any hands up, Gina? Because I get the postage strip, I don't see all. Okay, so going down to C, educator evaluations are based on multiple measures to demonstrate effectiveness. So in Wisconsin, all districts are required to adopt an educator effectiveness system. Waunakee uses the state model. Educator practice, teacher practice, I should say, not all assignments use the same frameworks, are evaluated using the Danielson framework for teaching. And if we go to the link, this takes you to a very brief overview of what the indicators are that evaluators look for when they evaluate teacher practice. In Waunakee, I've also linked to you know, what our probationary teacher process would look like and what our summary teacher process would look like. These are really designed for an internal audience. So if you do look at these after the meeting and you are a non-educator or someone unfamiliar with our district procedures and you don't understand what a term means, please feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to kind of explain what's going on here. But the key thing to understand is, and I just lost my screen. There we go. The key thing to understand is, I've got to close some stuff. There we go. Is that we do have a process. It's based on measures of observed practice in the classroom. It's also based on something called a student learning objective or school learning objective, or an SLO, which is a goal that our educators set, often working as a team to set a goal for a student progress outcome they would like to see happen over the course of the year and what strategies they're trying to use to help their students towards that desired level of performance. So it's got a performance measure. It also sometimes has an action research dimension to it. So again, yes, we have a system, and yes, it builds on multiple measures. It's most clearly developed for teachers. Again, this is looking at educator evaluations towards licensed educators. Principals and associate principals also fall under a similar framework. We're not required to by the state, but we also have adopted versions of the Danielson framework for student services staff as well. Katie, I see you have your hand up.
You touched all the other groups, but I wanted to touch, we've talked a lot about paraeducators. We do have a framework for paraeducators that we mirrored-ish their job duties with some of the educator effectiveness and have standards. And they also are on a 3-year cycle, I believe, very similar to teachers, of observations with feedback and then evaluations.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions on the information we've presented in C? Again, encourage you, check out the links if you have questions, particularly if you're a non-K-12 educator. Happy to help navigate that with you. Gina, do we have any hands up?
No, but I have a comment myself. around accountability to issues of equity. We've heard that come up a couple of times on the committee, especially around our conversation about, what happened in Sun Prairie or things like that. And people have expressed interest in, teachers being held accountable for their intervention. That one was more for their curriculum. Like if a situation were to arise in their classroom, what do we expect of teachers, and what might happen if those expectations are not met? So I just had a question about, within the framework, I have not, found any direct connection to these issues of equity. So might we consider, is something I'm wondering, having some sort of expectation of staff when it comes to these issues, and could that be a part of evaluation or some standard of professional growth?
So that's an interesting question. And I think, within the big context of district personnel, the answer to that is yes. Within the framework of what this is getting at, which is your district's educator effectiveness system and the professional growth system, that's a little bit more complex than a straightforward yes, because the state has two frameworks that districts can choose from. Districts can bring in another framework, but you have to apply to the department and you have to prove equivalency. It was something, there had been some very informal conversations pre-pandemic among Dane County districts that, boy, we like the mentoring rubric. It's very contemporary, very equity focused. Also recognizing that if you were a new teacher, you'd be getting feedback on the Danielson framework from your principal and getting feedback on the optimum learning environment framework from your mentor. And that's two sets of frameworks. And could we maybe streamline it? So there had been some interest in teaming up to develop a proposal for DPI to look at the OLE as a replacement for Danielson. That would be a big retraining project, and it would be a big project to demonstrate equivalency for DPI. So I can't promise that from an educator effectiveness standpoint that would change, but it has been a topic that's come up in terms of dealing with it from our staff training and staff expectations from a broader personnel perspective. That's definitely something that we're going to be working on. Diane, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks for this information. I think one thing it sort of reminds me of, because I find myself kind of flipping between the Waunakee framework and then the little piece that you did on the Daniels group piece, and it's a lot to digest. So I think back to the sort of issue of maybe we need. I feel like I might need some time to look at things, and I bet you probably addressed some of my questions, and I was so furiously trying to bring it all in that maybe I didn't hear. Can you repeat a little bit of, I see all of these facets, these different domains, and I'm thinking about what I heard Gina say about equity and how much flexibility is there, because those are sort of like statements, and there must be some sort of rubric or something behind this for the person who is doing the observation to be able to use to collect data. And or if there's not, and you create the rubric, maybe there's flexibility within that. But I don't think I quite got that jump between the domains and the actual assessment tool.
So there are electronic assessment platforms for both the Danielson framework and also for that framework you saw under the mentoring. If I were to go up to my book cabinet here, I could actually pull out a pretty hefty book on the Danielson framework. There's a lot there behind that. There is also much more documentation behind that mentoring framework, although not as extensive as the Danielson. So there are look-fors, there are more developed descriptors. Katie, as an evaluator, actually has to periodically initially get trained and then periodically recertify on watching classroom video and scoring what she sees. So that's an attempt by DPI to provide fidelity from the evaluator's perspective. But
there's also a every single year, every single teacher, whether it's no matter what year in your every 3-year cycle it is, as educators, we have to do a self-evaluation every year. And so there are all of these like subheadings within the framework. And so I understand that we need to, use the framework and use the established tool. But I think as a district, we could choose to put focus on a particular area. In the last couple of years, to be honest, I'm not exactly 100% sure what's going on the last 2 years because there have been some changes, and with all the, obviously everyone is aware it's been a weird couple of years, but there have been some alterations. So there's been kind of a shift towards like picking your own areas of focus. And if the district were to pick an area of focus that everyone were to work on for a certain cycle of years, or provide specific training to administrators about specific things to look for, I think that we could use the existing tools and still put our efforts into this particular lane of it.
Thank you, Gina. And yeah, we do have some flexibility in the framework. We could emphasize particular components heavily if we wanted to as a district. I think one of the challenges there is simply the Danielson framework is good for what it does, but equity, it was not designed first and foremost with DEI focus in mind, and that's a characteristic. I'm going to keep moving us along because I think Diane has signaled and the clock is signaling we're going to kind of come through these and probably have to come back to the next meeting on this. But if we go down to the next item, our district works with area higher education programs to identify and recruit aspiring educators from underrepresented populations and critical shortage areas. I can tell you unambiguously that we don't do this. This is a growth area. To the extent that it happens, it only happens in conversations around areas of license shortage. So if we have a tech ed educator vacancy open, there are about 2 new people licensed in tech ed annually, same for ag. We reach out to their institutions from that standpoint, but in general, we don't do this. This is a growth area. Our board offers competitive educator compensation and working conditions, incentivizes national board certification, honors representation by unions with collective bargaining rights, and permits educators to bargain teaching and learning conditions. So I'll show you a little bit on the compensation picture in the next slides. One thing I need to acknowledge here, and it's very possible there are different perspectives within the committee on this, but in Wisconsin, a public school district's ability to collectively bargain is legislatively governed by Act 10. The district collectively bargains everything it's allowed to under state law with our organized units. However, one thing that's mentioned here in the slide, teaching and learning conditions, Act 10 does not allow districts to collectively bargain, and that's an artifact of state law. We don't have an ability to do this. We do try to confer with our educators, both formally and informally, on matters of concern. We probably do this very imperfectly, but we try, to do that. But from the collectively bargain angle, we have some pretty strict statutory restrictions. National board certification, that is a national credential where educators need to submit a pretty substantial portfolio of their work, including video, to gain the certification. It is recognized in our salary advancement system. Teacher compensation is a very complex topic. I'm not going to throw a bunch of averages at you because depending on the experience profile and a particular assignment, averages do not tell the whole story. So what I'm just going to share, this doesn't have to be the end of the conversation certainly, is just some scatter plots. So this is from an application we use that draws from DPI data. And what this shows here, this is so on the state report we saw at the beginning, each dot was a school. On this chart, each dot is, in this case, on this particular one, a teacher in Dane County for all of the districts. This is an all district slide. And the red highlights, those are Waunakee staff. And you see a trend line. And the Waunakee trend line is the darker line, and the county trend line is the lighter line. They mostly overlap until later. And what you see on the y-axis is salary as reported to the state. And what you see on the x-axis is years of experience as reported to the state. And education certainly is one of those areas where compensation does tend to move up in a linear fashion as you gain an experience. So this is where this shows a picture of Waunakee teachers in relation to Dane County teachers. The next slide does the same thing with mid-sized Dane County districts. So what this chart does, and you can see what the districts are over here on the right-hand side. It's just Forest, McFarland, Middleton, Cross Plains, Monona Grove, Mount Horeb, Oregon, Stoughton, Sun Prairie, and Verona and Waunakee. We've removed the smaller districts like Wisconsin Heights, Belleville, Deerfield, etc. We've also removed Madison Metropolitan. And again, the Waunakee teachers are in the pinkish red. The Waunakee trend line is the dark line. The trend line for the whole set of districts in this comp is the gray line. I don't want to characterize this. I leave it to each of you to draw your own conclusions and ask follow-up questions based on the data here. Even this chart being a scatter plot is in itself a simplification for what's a very complicated issue. So I will pause right there. Are there questions? And is there any additional context some of our educators in the group would like to share?
Tim, I have a question about the data, just because I remember seeing this before at different meetings, but like the outlier, let's say, I think it says year, I don't know. It's in the lower right-hand column, all the way down to the bottom. That'd be someone who's probably more like a 50% position, correct?
Yeah, so most of the outliers well below the trend line are people who are on partial FTE contracts, 50% contracts, 75% contracts. Likewise, where you see outliers on the high side, that's kind of a case-by-case basis depending on the salary framework in that district. They could be teachers who have significant additional duties on top of their base teaching assignment.
Right, so like if you're a coach or something like that, that's included within your full salary, even though.
It would be. And right. In some districts, I mean, even in ours, I mean, there are certain credentials that gain you additional steps on the salary schedule. And that would be true in, I mean, every district's a little different, but usually there's an individual story between each of the high variants as well.
So I'll just chime in. I see that Nia's hand is up, but I serve on the teacher compensation committee that works with the HR department right now, because we are looking at reconsidering what's going on, because it has been found to not be functioning as it was intended. And as our group has spent a lot of time looking at this and similar things, the outliers actually often are people who are being undercompensated based on their experience, and that has happened for lots of different reasons, because of placement on hire, because of freezes following Act 10, which was the collective bargaining shift that we talked about in 2011, freezes that the district has done, additional decisions by the district to not honor the system of points that is based on professional development. So this, as Tim said, is a very complicated issue, but it is something that's being studied deeply right now in order to try to adjust the system, because there are really two components, which is that base wage increase, which is the consumer price index, which, as Tim mentioned, is the only piece that the Waunakee Teachers Association can bargain. And then there's this supplemental pay category, which is based on professional development. And for each hour of professional development that someone attends, the handbook outlines an increase based on that. And there was a shift within the last several years to not follow the system as outlined, and the handbook language was changed to allow the district to pay what they were able to budget for that year. And so this review is meant to partially address that, so that teachers can anticipate what will happen with their compensation and not annually just be asked to take what the district can afford. So that's just some clarity I wanted to share.
So before we go any further, I just actually want to raise a point, and the nerd in me really enjoys this because it's never happened in the 3 years I've been on the board. We've actually fallen beneath a quorum here with the people who have left. So we actually cannot continue at this point. And what's actually interesting about this is that I think technically we will remain in session below a quorum until the next time we have a meeting. So that might require some fancy wording for our next agenda to effectively gavel in, close the meeting, and then gavel out, and then gavel back in again for the next meeting. So Rebecca, we can confer on how to actually do that properly, but I did notice with people dropping off, we're underneath a quorum at this point. So I don't know if there's any capstone to that you could put in to what we're doing now, Tim.
I think we should probably pause where we are. We can follow up by, no, this is in the folder. Now I will say, these are topics that are very, I mean, nothing like a good nuanced discussion of teacher compensation to clear a room. You know, it's an important topic, but it's very complex. And so I just invite people to look at it, and we'll follow up with an email. Reach out for questions. And when I feel there's a question that is potentially one that's not simply a technical question, but as a matter of perspective, we've got a lot of educators on the panel, but
are there contractors in this? I'm sorry, I just really need to know if there are contractors represented in this.
Say that again, Nia.
Are contractors represented in this?
So we have very few. I mean, paint a picture for me of what you mean by a contractor.
So like at DPI, the top level, we have a lot of contractors, and they get paid significantly more than our full-time staff because they don't get the same benefits. And so that would change our line based off on our contractors. And I'm completely ignorant to what teachers, how many contractors you raise as teachers. I'm so sorry.
The gig economy is something that does work in agency land, but it really is not a part of K-12 education.
Okay.
So we really don't have, the only time you'd really see a contractor would be for maybe some administrative positions where you have an unanticipated leave. And
Got
you
it.
might bring in a retired person or another resource on an LTE basis. But by and large, we don't do contractors.
Okay, so contractors would change that variation. That's all. Thank you.
They would if they existed.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
So at this point, I think the only thing we can really do is either we would do a motion, quick Googling my Robert's rules here. We can either do a motion to fix the time to adjourn, or we can just do a motion to adjourn at this point.
I think a motion to adjourn would be my suggestion. I'm happy to make it.
All right.
I
would
second you,
second that.
Tim.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry, Laura. I'm sorry. I'll let you. Laura.
Nia beat you just by a second.
Sorry, Laura. I will let you next time.
Motion by Tim and seconded by Nia. All in favor of the motion to adjourn, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Well, we're being adjourned anyway, so thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, thank you. Bye-bye.
Gina, just before you go, just unrelated, if I get a question that's less technical